Oh hey Vaishnava Guru, Doyara Saguru, Dase Guru Gori.
Oh hey Vaishnava Thakura, Doyara Sagara, Edase Karuna Kori.
Diyapada Chaya Sodohe Amaya.
Diyapada Chaya Sadaya Maya.
Diyapada Chaya Sodohe Amaya. Tomara Charana Dhore. Tomara Charana Dhore.
Chaya Vega Domi, Chaya Dosha Shodhi, Chaya Guna Deho Dase.
Jaya Vega Domi, Jaya Dosa Sodhi, Jaya Guna Deho Dase. Jaya Guna Deho Dase. Jaya Satsanga Deho He Amare. Jaya Satsanga Deho He Amare. Jaya Satsanga Deho He Amare. Boshechi Sangero Ashe.
Ekakiya Mara Nahi Payabala, Harinam Sankirtane.
Ekakiya Mara Nahi Paya Bala, Harinam Sankirtane. Harinam Sankirtane. Tumi kripa kore Shadavindu diya. Tumi kripa kore Shadavindu diya. Tumi kripa kore Shadavindu diya. Deho Krishna nama dane. Hare से तुम्हारा कृष्ण दीते पारो तुम्हारा सकते आचे
कृष्ण से तुम्हारा कृष्ण दीते पारो तुम्हारा शक्ति आचे
अमितो गंगा कृष्ण कृष्ण बोली
अमितो गंगा कृष्ण कृष्ण बोली
अमितो गंगा कृष्ण कृष्ण बोली गैतावा पाचे पाचे ओहे वैष्णव ठाकुरा दोयरा सागरा वेदा से करुणा कोरी ओहे वैष्णव ठाकुरा दोयरा सागरा वेदा से करुणा कोरी वैष्णव ठाकुरा ओहे वैष्णव ठाकुरा वैष्णव सागरा दोयरा सागरा
वेदा से करुणा कोरी
हरे कृष्ण प्रभु धन्यवाद प्रणाम
Hare Krishna Prabhu, Danvat Pranam, Jai Srila Prabhupada.
जय श्री प्रभु जय गुरु
Hey,
How are you प्रभु
good, good. Yes, I'm glad
Hare
to be
Krishna,
with you.
Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. Hare
Hare
Krishna.
Krishna, Prabhu. Dandavat Pranam. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna Mataji. Hare Krishna Digi Bhakti Mataji.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. Hare
Hare Krishna Tulvaya.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Dandavat Pranam. Jai Srila Prabhupada.
Danvat Pranam. Hare Krishna Mataji.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. Dandavat Pranam.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, that was Pranav.
Hare Krishna Danvat Pranam. So welcome everyone. We will get started. And one quick thing before I forget. Rashmi Mataji is helping in making a nice Excel sheet to keep track of our progress. So the homeworks, the exams, and so you probably saw that sheet was posted on the Bhakti Shastri WhatsApp group. So when you get a free moment, please fill it out, and soon she'll add the homeworks to that as well. So the homeworks that you've completed and sent in, that you've emailed me, add those there as well. You'll just check a box or choose a tab that yes, I've completed this, or no, I have not completed this. So it's going to be very useful. It'll be very useful for all of you to keep track, and for me as well, because we're all doing it, but just, I can't remember who is completing, has completed, which homeworks and which are they registered or non-registered, like that. There's some devotees, a few devotees come just to listen, just to attend, and others are doing it for credit, so to say, for the certificate. So just wanted to highlight that link. Please fill it out if you are taking it as a course. If you're just attending and listening, you don't need to fill it out. So thank you. So we'll start with the pranam mantras. I will share my screen here. Om Jnanam Timirandhasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshururmilitam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadahmayam Tadadi Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavangsha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamsha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanustute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhyasya Kripa Sindhubhya eva cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Something got stuck here. So last time we had completed chapter 12, and now we are starting with chapter 13. So this chapter is kind of a very interesting chapter. After Krishna speaks about devotional service, Arjuna again has a list of questions. And he has a list of questions that are very similar to his questions in chapter 8. And so he, after receiving the knowledge of devotional service, he wants further clarification on key philosophical topics. And that's why this chapter is entitled Nature, Enjoyer, and Consciousness. And the Sanskrit titles are varied. Sometimes it's called Kshetra Kshetragya Jnana, or Purusha, Prakriti, Atma Jnana, Sambandha Jnana, something like that. Various titles, names for this chapter. So the Gita has 5 topics. We all know, right? There's 5 themes of the Gita, 5, ontological categories in this world that the Gita covers and tells us, gives us the foundational knowledge. The first one is Atma, then Prakriti, then Karma, Kala, and then Ishwar. And in this chapter, Krishna is dealing with a few of these, as you will see. He's going through many of these topics because Arjuna has many questions. And this chapter will also remind you of chapter 8, because Arjuna in chapter 8 also, he begins with a list of questions, and Krishna then gives him a list of answers. So in this one, we're understanding nature, Prakriti, Purusha, the enjoyer, and consciousness. So 1, 2, and 5 particularly. Skip this one. So link to the previous chapters. In the first 6 chapters of Bhagavad Gita, the knower of the body, the living entity, and the position by which he can understand the Supreme Lord are described. So previous 6 chapters are bhakti. In the middle 6 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita, the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the relationship between the individual soul and the super soul in regard to devotional service are described. The superior position of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the subordinate position of the individual soul are definitely defined in these chapters. Understanding the connection between the bhakti section and the jnana section will help reveal the reason that jnana is discussed last. In text 12.7, Lord Krishna promised to save his devotees from the path of birth and death. Chapters 13 to 18 fulfill this promise by supplying the philosophical knowledge necessary to extricate oneself from material entanglement. So on one hand, bhakti is the ultimate goal. Bhakti is the essence, the ultimate purpose, the ultimate goal of all practices and spiritual knowledge. Yet at the same time, in one sense, we need jnana to achieve that ultimate goal of bhakti. So Krishna describes, spends an entire section describing this goal of bhakti, this ultimate knowledge of bhakti. And then after that, in chapters 13 to 18, he's fulfilling his promise of saving his devotees from the path and birth and death by then providing them the knowledge necessary to get out of this, or giving them the jnana. Now, this jnana is also, in one sense, bhakti, because this jnana supports bhakti. This jnana is not impersonal, speculative knowledge, but this jnana is simply devotional service or bhakti. One who understands the difference between the body, the soul, and the supersoul, beyond them both, attains liberation from this material world. So Krishna says in the Gita, many places he says, and here the same theme is there, Janma karma chime divyam evam yoveti tattva tyaktva deham punarjanma naiti mameti surjana. That one who understands the nature of my appearance and activities does not, after leaving this material world, take birth again in this world. But Krishna says he attains my eternal abode. So again, this transcendental knowledge is different than our materialistic knowledge. In this transcendental knowledge, by understanding this knowledge and realizing it, and the only way to realize it is through bhakti, one actually breaks the bonds of this material world. So in the Gita, everything is bhakti. That's one thing to remember. Everything from beginning to end is pure bhakti. But then there's flavors of bhakti. And this bhakti is the knowledge that one develops or inculcates in reaching the Supreme Lord. Just like the Bhagavatam, reading the Bhagavatam is bhakti yoga. It's knowledge, but it's bhakti yoga. Similarly, reading the Bhagavad Gita is bhakti yoga. It's knowledge, but it's bhakti yoga. Because it's not speculative knowledge. It's not mundane speculative knowledge. It's knowledge about Krishna that's given by Krishna to increase our love for him. And this is the means, the thing that breaks the shackles of this material existence. And so Krishna here is saying the same thing, that if you understand this knowledge, you can attain liberation from this material world. It becomes a pathway or means to reach that supreme destination. So Arjuna asked 6 questions in this chapter. Just like in chapter 8, he asked 8 questions. Of them, 7 were very philosophical. In this one, he asked 6 questions, and they're kind of very simple and they go together very well. Arjuna inquires about matter, spirit, and knowledge. These 3 things. In terms of matter, he has 2 kind of topics or questions. One is Prakriti and Kshetra. The second one, spirit, he asks about Purusha and Kshetragya. Prakriti means nature and the field. Purusha means the person and the knower of the field. And knowledge is Jnana, knowledge, and Gyeya, the knower of knowledge, or what is to be known. Jnana and Gyeya. So knowledge and what is to be known. These are the 6 questions that Arjuna asks Krishna. And here they are. Nature, the enjoyer of that nature, Prakriti, Purusha. Kshetra, the field of activities. Kshetragya, the knower of the field of activities. Jnana, knowledge, and the process of knowing it. And Gyeya, what is to be known, or the object of knowledge. So text 1 is Arjuna's 6 questions. Text 2 to 7, Krishna explains the field of activities and the knower of the field. So again, the difference between the body and the soul. Here we are again. Text 8 to 12 further explains the process of knowledge and liberation. 13 to 19 explains the object of knowledge. And 20 to 26, Krishna explains Prakriti, Purusha, and their union, And finally, 27 to 35, Jnana Chakshu, the vision of knowledge. So we'll go through these, and I'll try to go through it quickly because it's a long chapter. Krishna explains that the field of activity, kshetra, is the body, and the knower of the field, kshetragya, is the soul. There's also a second kshetragya, the super soul, who is the knower of the fields. So Krishna answers, Kshetra, text 2, the body is the field of activity. And text 4, Kshetragya, the soul is a knower, number 1 of the field of activities. What does it mean? According to his capacity to dominate material nature and according to his capacity to enjoy sense gratification, one is given a particular body. So Krishna says that according to our capacity to dominate material nature and our capacity to enjoy sense gratification, one is given a particular body. And that's the kshetragya, the soul. What does this mean? It means that the super soul, according to these two things, gives a soul a particular body by which they can do these two things. So therefore, the second knower is the super soul, the knower of the field of activities. So in this body, there are two knowers. One is the soul and the other is the super soul. And they're not one. The kshetragya, that is all cognizant, is the supreme, and the kshetragya, that is us, is the soul. And jnana, he defines as knowledge of the body, the soul, and the super soul. So one who can understand the difference between these three things, that person is in knowledge. So here's a nice image. You see the field is the body, the crops are happiness and distress that result as a result of each body that we have. And the knower is a person who knows his field, or who plants the seeds in his body and gets different crops according to the seeds that he plants. So according to the desires that we have, we get certain results of happiness and distress from the field, which is our body. So this is why Krishna gives this metaphor, because it's a very apt metaphor. Body is a field, it's a neutral ground. We get what we implant, we get what we invest. The soul is a knower of his body. The super soul is a knower of all bodies. That's the difference between the soul and the super soul. So Prabhupada gives the example of how a normal person will know his particular plot of land. You know, whatever land he owns, it might be his backyard, it might be 10 acres, but whatever they've grown and whatever they know, that's what they know. But the super soul is like the king, and that's a metaphor, the king, who is cognizant not just of one plot of land, but all the plots of land in the kingdom. And not maybe very specifically, but generally. But Krishna knows specifically and generally all the different bodies of all living entities, because he's present in every body. Krishna, like he says in the second chapter of Gita, he tells Arjuna, you are just aware of this life and this body, but I am aware of all the bodies that you and I have taken over the course of eternity. So that's the difference between the soul and the super soul. Both are knowers, but one's knowledge is very limited to their own body. They don't know what's going on in another person's body or mind. And the other person's knowledge is the king's knowledge. So now in this section, to discuss the field, Krishna discusses the field in 5 ways. The first is how the body is constituted, 6 and 7. What changes the body undergoes, 7 and 20. How, where, when the body is produced, 6, 21, 22, and 30. The identity of the knowledge of the field of activities, 14 to 18 and 23. And 5, the influence of the knower, 14 to 18. Text 4, Krishna raises 5 topics. How the body is constituted is answered in text 6 and 7. The 5 great elements, false ego, intelligence, the unmanifest, the 10 senses, and the mind, the 5 sense objects, the aggregate, the life symptoms, and convictions. So these are the different constituents of the material body. The 25 elements, 24 elements. The 25th element is the soul. The 24 elements that are there. And this is called Sankhya philosophy. So Krishna is going through all the 24 elements that constitute the body and combined form Sankhya philosophy. These are the 5 great elements: earth, water, fire, air, ether, false ego, buddhi, ahankara, buddhi, the unmanifest, the pradhana, the 10 senses, and the mind. Actually, this is more than the 24 elements, because pradhana is generally not listed in the 24 elements. The 10 senses, taste, touch, etc. And then those are 5, and then you have the working senses, the hands, the legs, etc. The 5 sense objects, form, sound, etc. The aggregate, the life symptoms, and convictions. Yeah, so this is actually more than the 24 elements. What changes the body undergoes is answered in text 7 and 20. This is a very technical chapter. And these changes are continuously moving throughout our body. And those are desire, hatred, happiness, distress, the aggregate, and convictions. Their transformations and the modes of matter are products of material nature. So all the transformations and the modes of matter are products of material nature. How, where, when the body is produced is answered in text 6, 21, 22, and 30. Nature is said to be the cause of all material causes and effects, whereas a living entity is the cause of the various sufferings and enjoyments in this world. This is due to his association with that material nature. All activities are performed by the body, which is created of material nature, and the self does nothing. So this is Krishna tells that all of this is going on by material nature. Prakrite kriyamanani gunai karmani sarvasha. Ahankara vimudhatma kartamiti manyate. That the soul is actually doing nothing. Everything is being done prakriti. In fact, only by prakriti. In fact, only the fool thinks that he is the doer of these activities. What in fact can we do? Right? What in fact can we accomplish without nature? We cannot even breathe without nature. Without the help of Prakriti, one cannot even walk. Even our hands cannot function unless our body allows them to function. Well, then what does the self do? The self only desires. It's our desires that we are responsible for. Because according to the soul's desires, generally, even that is up to Krishna. But according to our desires, our body moves in certain ways. And I say it's up to Krishna because if our body doesn't work, if Krishna decides, if Prakriti decides not to cooperate with the desires of the soul, then it won't cooperate. But in the general circumstance, if it does cooperate, it's my desire to lift up a glass of water, therefore I can lift up a glass of water. But if I desire to lift up a glass of wine, then I'll lift up a glass of wine. And that choice, that desire is mine. But in either case, I'm not the doer in the sense of I'm not the one who accomplishes that task. Now, by the way, this is an empty glass, no wine in it. It's only water, right? So the soul is different from this material nature, from this material body. And the connection between the soul and the body can only take place by the allowance of Krishna, the super soul, and nature. And then Krishna in text 14 to 18 and 23 speaks of the identity and influence of the knower of the field of activities. He says, there's another transcendental enjoyer, the Lord, the supreme proprietor, who exists as the overseer and permitter, and who is known as a super soul. Everywhere are his hands and legs, his eyes, heads, and faces, and he has ears everywhere. The super soul is the original source of all senses. Yet he is without senses. He is unattached, although he is the maintainer of all living beings. He transcends the modes of material nature, and at the same time, he is the master of all the modes of material nature. He is a source of light in all luminous objects. He is beyond the darkness of matter and is unmanifested. He is knowledge. He is the object of knowledge, and he is the goal of knowledge. He is situated in everyone's heart. And then Prabhupada in the purport, he talks about the different levels of consciousness. There are various levels of consciousness. We're all conscious, but according to the evolution of our consciousness, meaning our spiritual consciousness, how much it's developed, we will be conscious of certain things. Just like also just maturity over time, just like a child is conscious and an adult is conscious. But what they're conscious of is very, very different. So these are the different levels of consciousness. And again, this is the technical part. We'll be through this very quickly, and then we get to the more juicy part, so to say. But this, again, everything is equally relishable in the Gita, but this is more philosophical in nature. So the first level of consciousness is Annamaya, which is the level of consciousness of dependence upon food for existence. Dependence upon our own food, that we are just conscious of food, Annamaya. Just like little children, toddlers. I have a 3-year-old who before that, I have 2 children, but the younger one, before that, just now he's kind of developed more, but before that, all he was conscious of was food. Whatever you gave him, you put in his mouth. And you could feed him all day and he just enjoyed it so much. So dependence upon food for existence. It's just about food. Even if they, even if something changes dramatically, their home, their country, whatnot, they are not so cognizant of it. Their main concern is if they get food. Pranamaya means maintaining one's own survival. So children also in general, and people of kind of very less developed consciousness are simply engaged in maintaining themselves. And quite honestly, this was Darwin's level of consciousness. That's why he said that life is simply about the survival for existence, the survival of the fittest, the struggle for existence, right? He said this is all life is about. And because that's how he defined what human life is, his evolutionary theory made perfect sense to him. But he was only on level 2. Level 1 and level 2. People search for food, they're all huntermen, and its life is simply the struggle for existence, pranamaya. And animals, you see, right? Even the mom, dad animals will care about their children, but to a certain extent. It's like they care for them for a few days, and then the ducklings are off in their own world. In fact, ducks, I think, take care of them even more, but other animals, a few hours after they're born, it's like fend for yourself, because now I have to fend for myself, and they go and eat food, and each one is trying for their own survival. Even if a close member of their clan is dying, they feel no ethical obligation to try to share their food with them. They will just maintain their own survival. Children also, they're not cognizant that others have also needs. And so that's why, like I mentioned, I have 2 children. The older one, when they're small, like 4 or 5 years old, they can be perfectly happy in keeping all the toys for themselves. And it makes perfect sense for them, right? They keep collecting the toys and they make a huge big pile. And they might have 100 toys. And if the other one has even one, they'll go and snatch it from them and take it. Because they just want to maintain themselves and their own survival and their own happiness. It's just food and survival. Jnanamaya is awareness of one's own thinking, feeling, and willing. One appreciates the subtle interactions of mind, intelligence, emotions, aesthetics, etc. So in more developed animals, like elephants, you find feelings of emotions and right and wrong in them. Like if you wrong an elephant, they can be very angry. If they feel they've been slighted, they've been undermined, if you give food to one of them but not the other, they feel it. Similarly, children, as they develop, they start to, feel offended or, hurt. They're not still cognizant so much about others, but at least they're cognizant that there's something like right and wrong, and I have emotions. Oops, what happened here? Okay. Then level 4, Vijnanamaya. This is very interesting, actually, these levels of consciousness. Realization of the difference between the body and the spirit. So spiritual life begins from Vijnanamaya. Most of society is simply on this level. And a person on level 4 is way above the rest of society, and it's such basic knowledge. Realization between the body and the spirit, or rather, someone who has this knowledge is rare in our society. And this is an impersonal realization, even not even personal, that I'm just spirit. I'm something above this body. I'm something beyond this body. And finally, the 5th platform is Anandamaya. And this is the actual realization, the level of consciousness of devotional service, of personhood and bhakti. Anandamaya, one identifies as a servant of the Supreme Lord. So one realizes that I am a servant, I am a person, and there's other persons also. And my duty, my nature is to serve the Supreme Lord. So these are the 6 levels of consciousness. And Prabhupada is saying we need to move from Annamaya, simply pursuing our food and clothing and existence, to Anandamaya, right? And this is just this morning, I was listening in a class, right? That this is the thing, that we are so concerned about our material things. But knowledge means realizing that at the time of death, will all these things matter to us? Will that Tesla matter when I'm dying? Will that house matter to me when I'm dying? Will that car, will that those clothes, will that even food matter to me when I'm dying? But what will matter to me? What will matter to me is whether or not I have realized my spiritual identity, whether or not I have spent this life serving Krishna, and whether or not I have spent this time chanting Krishna's holy name. So spiritual life is actually focusing on what's important. It's not giving up anything, it's not neglecting anything, it's not denying yourself of anything, but rather it's engaging yourself in what is important. um, so Kshetra is the gross body, Annamaya and Pranamaya, and the subtle body, Jnanamaya. Kshetragya is the individual soul, the Vijnanamaya, and the supreme soul, Anandamaya. So the different levels of consciousness are now being mapped to the different aspects of reality. So remember, the kshetra was a field, and the field is the material part, has two parts, the physical body and the subtle body. The physical body is Annamaya and Pranamaya. So the drive just for food and for existence is connected to the body. And that's the bodily level that we're at, where most people are at. And that's why they're concerned of that. You know, like nomadic tribes or something, they're just looking for food. And then as civilization develops, they start to move from the physical body to the subtle body. And this subtle body is the Jnanamaya. And the soul level is the Vijnanamaya, understanding the difference between Kshetragya as a knower of the field, which is the soul, understanding the difference between the body and the soul. So I understand who I am. And Anandamaya comes on the level when we understand the supreme soul, our relationship with Krishna. I'm not sure if my laptop has frozen. Can all of you hear me clearly? Can you see the slides?
Yes,
Or...
yes, Prabhu. Yes, Prabhu.
Thank you. Yes. So, summarizing the philosophical conclusions of the great sages, especially of Vyasadev's Vedanta Sutra, Krishna explains that the field of activities, kshetra, consists of the gross and subtle elements, the senses and sense objects. Transformations of this field cause desire and hatred, happiness and distress, etc. So, this is what we've been discussing. Finally, text 13.5, Krishna is saying, that knowledge of the field of activities of the knower of that knowledge of the field of activities and of the knower of activities is described by various sages in various Vedic writings. It is especially presented in Vedanta Sutra with all reasoning as to cause and effect. So what is this book, Vedanta Sutra? It's actually a very interesting book. And in our Krishna consciousness movement, we don't read the Vedanta Sutra because the Srimad Bhagavatam is the commentary on the Vedanta Sutra. Commentaries already include the text, and that's why we just read the Srimad Bhagavatam. And that's the Amala Puran, the best everything. But the Vedanta Sutra is kind of the essence of all the Upanishads and the Vedas, written in very systematic form. So if you remove all the stories of the Bhagavatam and you just have the philosophy and kind of the basic philosophy, not the the very high level bhakti philosophy, then that's the Vedanta Sutra. And it all these things are very systematically described. The soul, the difference of the body and the soul, the why do we suffer is one section of the Vedanta Sutra. What is the nature between Prakriti, the different elements, and the self, the nature, the relationship between Prakriti and the Supreme Lord. So if you really want, kind of like a guidebook to all the abstract ideas in Krishna consciousness. It's the Vedanta Sutra. And it's kind of Veda Anta. It's the philosophical grounding for a spiritual tradition. And every sampradaya in India had a commentary on the Vedanta Sutra. So the Gaudiya Vaishnava sampradaya, our sampradaya, coming from Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, also has a commentary on the Vedanta Sutra written by Baladev Vidyabhushan. And on the order of the Supreme Lord, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, being inspired by him and the Goswamis, he wrote this commentary on the Vedanta Sutra. So all of this Prabhupada here is saying is presented in the Vedanta Sutra. It's basically like the final Upanishad. It's the end, the Veda Anta, the essence of the Vedas, and the Upanishads are the kind of the culmination of the Vedas and part of the Vedas. So as I mentioned, the field of activities constitutes the 24 elements, which are the body. And here is that list, which I was going through before, but I was not able to do it properly myself. So here's the 5 great elements: earth, water, fire, air, ether, the 3 subtle elements, mind, intelligence, and ego, the unmanifest, which is the pradhana, the 5 knowledge acquiring senses, the 5 working senses, and the 5 sense objects. So here are the 5 working and the 5 sense objects, which I mentioned. The 5 knowledge inquiring senses are the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, and the skin. The 5 working senses are the voice, the legs, the hands, the anus, and the genitals. Because these are the senses that we use to acquire knowledge. We get it through our ears, our nose, our tongue. We get the knowledge of taste through our tongue. We get the knowledge of hard and soft things through our skin. These are the senses that we work with. So once you get the knowledge, well, what senses do we use to work with? Those are the hands and the legs. And the 5 sense objects are smell, taste, form, touch, and sound. Right. The mind has 7 qualities: desire, hatred, happiness, distress, the aggregate, life symptoms, consciousness, and conviction. These are the 7 qualities of the mind. So remember at the end of that list, which I was saying, this is more than 24. That list had the 24, plus it had these things also. That this is all constitutes the field of activities. Because the senses here are taste, eyes, which means sight, smell, etc. These are the 5 senses, but the most important sense, the 6th sense, is the mind, and that's also a material sense. So it's the field of activities. It's what the soul exists in. The soul is the knower of the field, remember, and this is the field of activities. And this mind, this 6th sense, has 7 qualities: desire and hatred, happiness and distress, the aggregate and life symptoms. These all are products of the mind. This is the functions of the mind. And this is why the Bhagavatam says that if we can focus the mind on Krishna, Savai Mana Krishna Padara Vindayor, then automatically we become perfectly happy. Because happiness and distress, desire and hatred, they exist in the mind. If our mind is happy, it doesn't matter where we're at, who we're with, and what situation is, we won't suffer. Right? That's pain is there, but suffering is optional. Right? People say, why? Because because it exists in the mind. The body is the representation of all these factors, and there are changes of the body, which are 6 in number. The body is born, it grows, it stays, it produces byproducts, then it begins to decay, and at the last stage, it vanishes. Therefore, the field is a non-permanent material thing. However, the kshetragya, the knower of the field, its proprietor, is different. So, same point here, Prabhupada is saying so nicely. The body goes through so many different stages, it changes, it's non-permanent, but the proprietor, the soul, is the continuing element. And many times in my classes, I'll ask the students, I'll give them this picture or a different version of the picture that's more clear. And I'll ask them to count the number of bodies here. And they'll count it and they'll be like 14. And then I'll say, now tell me the number of persons here. And they'll think and they'll say, one person. So say, therefore the body is different than the person. There's 14 bodies, but there's one person. So kshetragya, the 14 bodies are changing. The body is changing 14 times, but the person is not changing. The 5 great elements are a gross representation of the false ego, which in turn represents the primal stage of false ego, technically called the materialistic conception, or tamasa buddhi, intelligence in ignorance. Okay, so now text 8 through 19, description of jnana, the process of acquiring knowledge, and gyeya, that which is known. So this is the next section, and this was quite dense. So I think I'm going to stop here and see if there's any comments or questions, because now we get into the very wonderful part of the various qualities of knowledge. So Krishna talks again, we just covered that in chapter 12, the qualities of a pure devotee, the qualities of a self-realized person, and Krishna now goes through it again. They're so important. So jnana is cultivation of the qualities described here, is the real method of acquiring knowledge. Cultivation of the qualities described here, which we will see in the next verse, is a real method of acquiring knowledge. So it's through these qualities that actually we gain knowledge. And these qualities do constitute knowledge. And this is why in the scriptures it said, the Vedic scriptures are called path philosophies, meaning that knowledge is not there for knowledge's sake. Knowledge must lead to a transformation. Similarly, a transformation leads to knowledge. So then we read of these wonderful qualities that Krishna talks about, and he says, all this is knowledge, and aside from this, everything that there is simply ignorance. So I will, again, like I said, we'll take a pause here and see if there's any comments or questions up to this point, because even for me, this section is a bit hard. Yes, Divya Bhakti Mataji, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. So could you please talk about tamasa buddhi, intelligence and ignorance, the last slide that you completed? I'm a bit confused.
Sure, yes. Thank you for that question. And actually that reminds me, and I was thinking that I wanted to make one point on this, that even in the second chapter, Krishna talks about buddhi yoga, right? He talks about buddhi yoga, and he says that buddhi yoga is the same as bhakti yoga. Buddhi yoga is a yoga of intelligence. But when that intelligence is applied to Krishna, then that intelligence becomes a process of bhakti. In the same way, knowledge, and that's these final 6 chapters, when applied to Krishna, become a process of bhakti. So now going back to this verse, this slide that you had referred to, let's do this here. Okay, so the five great elements are a gross representation of the false ego, which in turn represents the primal stage of false ego, technically called the materialistic conception or tamasa buddhi, intelligence in ignorance. So these five elements, so everything in this material world is composed of the gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas. So it's not just that they're colored by the modes, goodness, passion, and ignorance, but actually the modes, goodness, passion, and ignorance, the combination of them produce everything. So what is most gross in the sense of physical, less subtle, gross as opposed to subtle, is a product of tamas. Tamas not exactly just in terms of ignorance, but in terms of solidity. Tamas has certain qualities. So these five great elements are a gross representation of the false ego. This is actually a very interesting point, because the other point is that everything in this material world is produced from ahankar. After Prakriti, the first evolute that's produced is ahankar, which means false ego. And out of that false ego, everything in this world manifests. Why? Because this whole world is not just our body, but this whole world is our false ego. It's the false world that I live in, right? So I identify that I am American. And that's the false ego, that I have a false conception of I belong to this country. So America is part of my false ego, maybe part of your false ego, not yours, you're in Canada, right? So North America is part of our false ego, and it's a combined one. We both identify with that, but it's a product of false ego. The physical body, earth, water, fire, air, ether, is also my false ego, right? So false ego in the mode of ignorance constitutes these five elements, gross elements. False ego in the mode of passion constitutes the mind, intelligence, and the mind and the intelligence. Just like I think that I'm a very intelligent man, I'm a PhD. That's a false ego, because I'm not a PhD. That's the body. I'm not an intelligent person. That's just the intelligence. That's not me, the soul. Einstein, right? He wasn't so much on the physical level because he didn't even care to dress properly or comb his hair properly, but he had the false ego on the intellectual platform. So this false ego on that level is rajasic buddhi. And then you have sattvika buddhi, and that would be intelligence focused upon Krishna. So these gross representative false ego, which in turn represents the primal stage of false ego, technically called the materialistic conception or tamasa buddhi. So the most gross false conception that a person has is that they're this body. Right? That's the most basic false ego. And when you have intelligence in the mode of ignorance, then that's the false conception we have. When a person advances, then they have the intelligence that, no, I'm not the body, but I'm the mind. I'm more than the body. They just don't run after physical pleasures, but they run for mental pleasures. And then the highest intelligence is that, no, I'm not even the mind also, I'm the soul. Does that answer your question?
I think so. Yeah, I mean, it gives me more information, so I think I'm going to have to process it and sit with it to try and fully understand. But thank you so much. That it helps.
Later on, maybe I'll share a chart in the group which kind of shows this nicely, because the false ego is very important to understand, and everything, the false ego, our false ego manifests on physical gross levels and also subtle levels. And so here, the primal stage of false ego is this body that's being shown of earth, water, fire, air, and ether. And that's a result of tamasa buddhi, or intelligence and ignorance. So like materialistic philosophers like big, the materialists, they use their intelligence to argue that we're just this body, right? They argue against the soul. So they're also intelligent. They're very, very intelligent. They write so many books like Daniel Dennett, but their whole intelligence is grounded in ignorance, such that they're arguing for only the material body. Yes. So these three things are connected: the elements, the false ego, and the intelligence, and the gunas, tamasa. So the physical elements are produced from the guna of ignorance. A person with a physical body doesn't mean that they are necessarily in ignorance, but the elements themselves are produced of the guna of tamasa. And so, yeah, so that's yet another thing. Yeah. Go
Hare
ahead.
Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare
Prabhuji,
Krishna.
I have a question.
Yes.
When we in a very gross misunderstanding, false ego stage, then why we do PhDs and we have a lot of fame and name when we know that we are only a body and not. I mean, we should be considering ourselves as souls.
Mm.
And we always
Yeah.
say that I have done this and I have planted so many trees, I have done this. So why does that happen? I mean,
Mhm. Yes.
why should we run for these degrees and we for so many medals and so on? Why does that? I mean, am I
Yes.
right in questioning?
No, very nice. That's Krishna Bhulya Ji Bhoga Vancha Kare. The Chaitanya Charitamrita says that when we forget Krishna, when we want to be the enjoyer and the controller, then we leave Krishna and we go to try to enjoy bhoga and enjoy this material world, right? So that is the problem, that when we why this is happening, because we want to be the enjoyer, we want to be the controller, we want to replace Krishna and put ourselves in that position, right?
Thank you, Prabhu.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Yes. And that's why we do it. But you're right that we have to come to this knowledge that no, I'm none of these things. So why should I hanker for these things, right? We can get these things and use them in Krishna's service, but we don't have to hanker for them because they're not me, right? Just today, this morning, Sham Sundar Prabhu, he was saying in his class that there was a man who had a very intelligent son, very successful son, and he had another son who was very simple and was not so successful, but was very good-hearted. And when that man became old, so this man would always praise the intelligent son, and he was always glorifying him, and he would always be ashamed and make the other son feel ashamed. But when he got old, this man, then his intelligent son, the one that he loved the most and that he praised all the time and who became so successful, that intelligent son wouldn't care for him. He wouldn't take care of him. Because he was so successful, so intelligent, and then also so proud. His father was always praising him. So he wouldn't take care of him. But his other son, who he thought was just a buffoon, didn't really care for him, he was coming over to the other son's home and taking care of his parents. And then finally, the father wanted to move into the house of the son who he didn't like before, who he thought wasn't very intelligent. And Shama Sundar Prabhu was saying that how that father must have felt, so embarrassed, so pained, that throughout my life I praise this other son, but my real son, this good-hearted son, I was criticizing, I was putting him down. So it's like that in the material world. This is the mentality that you're saying exactly, that we are searching after name and fame, or to make others, famous and big. But what matters is the heart, right? What matters is our Krishna consciousness. What matters is at the end, if we go back home, back to Godhead or not, if we make it back to Krishna, that is what matters. So that is the
Thank
point.
you. Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you.
Hare Krishna. Yashoda Vatsala Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, Dandavat. Thank you so much for this wonderful class, and I think a lot of technical things to learn.
Yes.
But at the same time, I was just trying to relate from my understanding, and I wanted to clarify this false ego part also. I had a question of what is the difference between false ego and true ego, but before that, when Mataji brought that point of 5 element, could you please clarify or confirm my understanding that these 5 elements actually, constitute the body, that makes the body one. Secondly, they make us feel, because the soul doesn't have anything of its own apart from, it just gets encapsulated by the body, which is caused by these 5 great elements. And then it gives me, these elements only make me, feel. Again, feeling, willing is or mind's property. So I was just, trying to understand whether this understanding is correct, that these elements actually, one, that they are not only just constituting the body, but they are actually giving me that feeling of, I'm this, I'm that. And then, my original question was, when this is the false ego, what is the true ego?
Yes. So, I mean, you're asking many questions and very, very pertinent questions. But you bring in a very wonderful point here, and that's I think the part that we now need to add, which I think will address your questions, is that the dissolution of the false ego does not mean that we don't have a real ego, and that's the mistake that the impersonalists make. That they think that, oh, the false ego is there, so let me just get rid of my false ego. But you cannot just get rid of your false ego without realizing your real ego. Because if that's your false ego, then in order to remove that, you need to understand who you really are. And so the real ego is that I am a servant of Krishna. Like, that is the real ego. That I am Jivera Sarupoy Nityera Krishna Das. And once we understand that this point, that I am an eternal servant of Krishna, I'm not the body, I'm not the intelligence, I'm not the mind, I'm not the senses, then we can give up this tamasa buddhi. We can give up these false conceptions and realize that I am the spirit soul. So we can give up the 5 elements: the earth, water, fire, ether. These 5, we won't identify ourselves as the physical body or the mental body. So understanding and realizing our real ego is very important in Krishna consciousness. Did I answer your question, or was there a part that I missed, Prabhu?
Yeah, Prabhuji, actually, yeah, that's what I was looking for, basically, again, I always feel like when I say feel will, I always get to know that point you had mentioned, and in various purports, Srila Prabhupada also mentioned, like feeling willing is, the characteristic of mind. You're talking with mind, not
Okay, so your question is, if feeling willing is a characteristic of the mind, then where's our free will, right? Because the mind is not us, it's part of the false ego. So, and this is the thing, that free will is a function of the soul, but feeling and willing is a function of the mind. But even that, material feeling and willing is a function of the material mind. But spiritual feeling and willing is part of the real ego, which is the soul. So Prabhupada, when he's asked by one of the disciples, very key point here that you bring up, the disciple asked Prabhupada, so once we're self-realized, do we get a new mind? We get a new senses? We get a new body? And Prabhupada says, no. Krishna consciousness means purifying the mind, purifying the senses. So the mind and senses that we presently have, which are the material, quote unquote, material mind and senses, they are the spiritual mind and senses covered by thick layers of material covering. And when those thick layers are removed and purified, what we have left is the spiritual mind, the spiritual intelligence, and the spiritual senses. So feeling and willing exists as part of the soul. Free will, feeling, willing, all these things exist. But when they are in contact with the material world, and the mind is in contact with the material world, then that same mind becomes contaminated. And then it becomes material, feeling, and willing. And that is not us. That is material. That is the material nature imposed on the soul. So purifying that means that we realize our true identity. Thank you.
Thank you, Prabhuji.
Saja. Thank you. Saja Mataji.
No problem. Can you hear me fine?
Yes, I can hear you. Yes, I see you and hear you. Yes.
I hope I'm zoomed in correctly. I'm on the phone, so please bear with
Yes,
me.
I can see you.
A little on. But I had I mean, it's brilliant what I just, all these discussions is just fantastic. I do have a comment and a couple of questions and a quick clarification.
Yes.
I think when you talked about the mode of the tamasic buddhi versus the rajasic buddhi, it reminded me of that quote where small minds discuss people, average mind discuss events, and great minds discuss ideas. And what was fascinating to me was, there is another level. So I used to always find that quote really, intriguing. And
Yes.
so, but it doesn't stop on the mental plane. We have to go to Krishna, go to the Sattvic Buddhi, which is amazing to learn
Yes.
that. But so that was my comment. But I have if you don't mind, can you go to the 24 element slide which you had? I wanted to just understand a little more about I have two questions there, actually. One is about the subtle mind. The subtle body, if I understand it correctly, that's what goes into next life with us, but there might be more. I'm not really sure. And then I'm trying to understand the mind. I didn't realize the consciousness is a part of the mind, which I just saw that today in your slides. So does the mind also go with us in the next life? Because if we develop Krishna consciousness, whatever state we develop in, that's where it will start, from my understanding, in the next life. So is mind going with us as a part of the subtle body in the next life, or what really? I'm just curious about that.
Very nice question. Very, very good question, because I read through that and I was thinking that this might lead to some questions. And this is the slide you're referring to. And then I didn't feel, I didn't explain it. So I'm glad you brought it back. So the life symptoms become a symptom of the mind. But like you said, the mind is a material, subtle element. It's not the kshetragya, or the knower of the field, but it's the kshetra, it's the field of activities. It's material. So why are the life symptoms, like consciousness and conviction, being described as symptoms of the mind? And that's the point that you're raising. That's the question that you're raising. The reason is because the soul and the consciousness of the soul is being manifest through the mind. So the mind exhibits the symptoms of life, like consciousness, free will, conviction. But the mind itself is not consciousness. It exhibits it. So the mind actually has the closest connection with the soul. The mind is producer of sattva gun, the mode of goodness. And through focusing the mind on Krishna, we can actually attain God. Because, and this is why it's in sattva gun fundamentally, because the Lord can manifest in the mind to us, right? So the mind is the carrier of the senses. And your question was, how does the mind go with the soul? Yes, until we're in this material world, the soul travels. The soul goes from one body to another with the material mind, intelligence, and false ego. So at the time of death, physical death, at the time of death, we give up our physical body, but we don't give up the mind, intelligence, and ego. And this is why our vasanas, our desires, our proclivities follow us from one life to another. That's the progress. People say, well, if in this life I work so hard in developing, my good qualities, developing my character, developing even my spiritual life, then what do I gain in my next life if I forget everything? Well, what we gain is that the mind is now more developed. And also remember how I've mentioned that the mind is not exactly separate from the soul. What we're calling the mind is the kind of the material mind imposed upon the spiritual mind, or the material mind that's coloring the spiritual mind. So the mind that's going along with the soul is this colored mind. And as we're progressing, we're purifying it more and more, so that eventually you just have the soul, the soul, which is a spiritual body, and that spiritual body has a mind, in it. And so that same mind is traveling from one body to another, and now it's just more purified. It's less matter and more spirit. Kind of like you have a body, which in this case I'll compare to the soul, and it's covered by clothes. And as summer comes, the layers of clothing that we're wearing reduce. So in winter we have a big heavy jacket, and then as spring comes it's a light jacket, and then summer comes it's just a t-shirt. So that clothes becomes thinner and thinner. In the same way, the material mind becomes thinner and thinner, and we see more consciousness, more spirituality, and less material things. So this is why the material mind does not give consciousness. It's not like the same as a soul, but it's connected with the soul. It exhibits the symptoms of life. And finally, just one point on what you started with. Therefore, yes, you're so right that most of Western philosophy, Eastern philosophy, they go down to the level of the mind and the intelligence. Like Descartes, he said there's a mind and there's a body. He got to that level that there's something different than the physical body. It's a mind. But they don't realize that third level, which is even below the mind, is the soul. And that's the place of great energy, of immense power. Even on the mental level, our minds get tired. Our mind has limitations. But on the spiritual, on the soul level, that's the level that we can, that is really ananda maya. Like we're saying, there's so much happiness in realizing our spiritual identity and our spiritual nature.
Wow. Now that's a lot packed. That's awesome. Thank you so much for that, for that explanation. Prabhu, so we have to work on these qualities of our mind for the Bhagavad Gita, desire, hatred, happiness, distress. And just a quick question. I'm trying to get a clarification on this word aggregate. I'm sorry if I missed it. Could you help me out what that is?
Yes. You're asking all the good questions. So the aggregate, my understanding is that this is the aggregate or the combination of all one's desires, right? So when we travel from one body to another, we have so many desires during our life, but at the end of life, it all comes together. And according to that aggregate, we get another body. So, I had the desire to, to ski. I had the desire to skydive. I had the desire to eat good food. I had the desire, all these things. Now, if I had the desire to fly and I had the desire to ski, then what determines whether in my next life I become a bird or I become a polar bear? Just as an example here, we may not become either, but if let's say we have material desires, what determines that? Well, it's the aggregate, the most intense desire that I had, kind of the combination of all desires put together was the intense desire to be a skier. And that's why our desires at our end of our life are most significant, because that's the desire that we held on to. And then in our next life, we become a polar bear. So that is the aggregate. Yeah.
Got it. So yeah, it will all be your desires were aggregated and they stick to your mind and we go into next life. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you so much for this. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, and that point that was clear, right? That the mind is the symptom of consciousness. It exhibits the life symptoms, but it's not consciousness itself. Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Shri Nitai Charan Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, Dandavat Pranam. Thank you for the wonderful class. I mean, you kind of unpackaged a very complex subject matter, different subject matters within that, and demystified by a lot of kind of, I mean, these pictures speak 1,000 words, as the saying goes. It's very nice of you. So my question is, I mean, looking at the same slide, mind is the processor of whatever we feel, whatever we go through. So the desire, hatred, happiness, and distress is processed by the mind. It's a status of mind. Like pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. So my question is, why do we call Krishna, or how do I understand? It's not why do I call, how do we understand? Krishna is known as Rishikesha, giving a pleasure to the, I mean, senses, a pleasure to the senses. And also Go Brahmana Hitaicha, right? He also gives pleasure to the cows and the senses. So at the same time, the mind also feels, the opposite of happiness, which is distress.
Yes.
I mean, how do we understand the word Go? I mean, both these terms, Go Brahmana Hitaicha and Rishikesha.
Yes, very nice question. And see, this is why this aspect, and all of you are bringing it out, this aspect of a spiritual body with spiritual senses, and a material body being like a wetsuit on that spiritual body, a covering on that spiritual body, is so important. Because otherwise, none of this makes sense. Krishna gives pleasure to the senses. But which senses? Not the material senses. Krishna is not the one who gives us a R-rated movie that gives people pleasure. That's why they watch it, or a horror movie. No, that is Maya pleasure. But the real pleasure, the Krishna pleasure, is when he gives pleasure to our spiritual senses, and we get unlimited spiritual happiness as a result of that. So when we engage our senses in Krishna service, he gives pleasure to our senses. He gives spiritual pleasure, which is ascertained or experienced by the spiritual senses. And the spiritual senses, material senses are not like two separate, machines going here. No, the material senses are covering it. So that's why we cannot experience that spiritual bliss so much until we're purified. But once we're purified, then we can experience it so nicely. So that's why Krishna is called one who gives pleasure to the senses, one who gives pleasure to the cows, one who gives pleasure to the brahmanas, because everything that's related with him is spiritual, and he's the source, Rama, the source of all pleasure. Do you have a follow-up to this, or did that answer it?
Thank you, Prabhu. I think my follow-up is, there's two words, right? Upadrishta and Anumanta, right? In this particular one, I mean, which you covered in one of the slides. So is he, because he sanctions and he approves, that is also known as Rishikesha? I mean, can I connect these two words to Rishikesha, or am I wrong in this?
Rishikesha means the controller of the senses. So he is guiding the senses as a super soul within our heart. He's controlling them in that way. He's guiding them, and the senses become controlled by him. Therefore, he's also known as a controller. When we engage, like the gopis, they can't think of anything other than Krishna. Their senses are completely drawn to him. But the terms Upadrishta and Anumanta, which Krishna is the witness and the permitter, those, one can connect that, but those also refer to decisions that we make that are not Krishna's decisions, but that Krishna allows and witnesses, permits and witnesses. So Krishna is the controller of the senses. However, we have our free will. And if we misuse those senses, though Krishna is the controller of the senses, if we misuse the senses, it's our decision, because he voluntarily doesn't control us. That's why we have free will. And he will permit it, he will witness it. But then we get the reaction. or he may not permit it or witness it. If we're, if enough is enough, then he doesn't allow it. So because not everything that we want to do, we can do. So Krishna is never the doer in the sense that he's the desire. Our mistakes are our own mistakes, but he's the sense he is in that sense the facilitator to a certain degree to allow the soul to try to fulfill his desires, and he's a facilitator in an impersonal way when it comes to material things. Like Prabhupada gives the example that when the child wants to play, then the parents arrange for a playground with a sandbox. And in that way, they are the witness and the permitter. They're seeing they're playing and they're also witnessing. But what the child does in the playground and in the sandbox is the child's decision. In the same way, Krishna is controller of everything. He's the controller of our senses because he gives us the playground and he gives us all these things. But he's not the doer, he's the permitter. What we're doing is our choice. Yes.
Excellent answer, Prabhu. Thank you. Appreciate it.
And finally, Bhadra Krishna Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, thank you very much for the wonderful class, as always. So Prabhu, you mentioned that in material life, we strive to achieve so many things. We want name, fame, and we want all awards and positions. And then when we come in contact with devotees and we take to Krishna consciousness, and then we start to understand that we are not the doer, we are this we are the soul, we are not this body. And we take to bhakti, we start chanting our rounds. But we also see at the same time that being in bhakti, there are some who still strive to achieve some awards, some targets in on the material platform, being in bhakti.
Yes.
So so that really boggles one's mind as to, okay, on one hand they are doing bhakti and they realize that Krishna is the doer, Krishna is the Supreme Personality. So then what makes them still want to get that name, fame? Are they being in bhakti is just like on the outer, like a different face of it, and behind they are at a different platform? Like, how do you contemplate these situations or the way they portray themselves?
Yes, Prabhu. So like we were talking about the gunas, bhakti can also exist in the gunas. So devotional service can also be practiced in the gunas. And Krishna talks about this. Is it chapter 18 or chapter? I forget which chapter it is. But he talks about bhakti in maybe chapter 14, maybe. Bhakti in the three modes of material nature. And when we have devotion, we give up the material world, but we come to Krishna consciousness. But we have devotion with a desire for name, fame, prestige, and power. Then the scriptures tell us that bhakti is in a particular mode of nature. So they're doing bhakti, but it's bhakti mixed with the mode of passion. That's where a lot of us are at. Where we're doing bhakti, we want to serve Krishna, but there's also something in it for me. Right? And that was also the yoga ladder, karma mishra bhakti, sakam karma yoga, not nishkam karma yoga. Something for you, Krishna, so the bhakti is there, but something for me also. Right? Something for you, Krishna, but I want to be famous as a result of doing this seva. Seva for you, but I also want some name and fame. And that's the hard part. Doing bhakti is not hard, but purifying our bhakti so that all for Krishna and nothing for me, that's the hard part. Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami wrote the Chaitanya Charitamrita, and certain devotees' names are mentioned very often. But I believe is it Raghunath Das Goswami or one Acharya told him that I will I would tell you my pastimes with Lord Chaitanya if you promise me one thing. He said, okay, yes, yes. He said, if you don't mention my name in your book. Right? Now, most of us, we think that, well, if I'm with Lord Chaitanya, then I would love to want my name to be mentioned along with Lord Chaitanya's name, or I want to serve, they have, one has love for Lord Chaitanya, but also the desire to be known as a great devotee or a sincere devotee. But he had no such desire, right? He said in a condition that you don't mention my name. And that's why his name is mentioned rarely, because his bhakti had become purified of all tamas, rajas, and even sattva, and was on the fully transcendental platform. Osama bin Laden is also bhakta, right? He's doing everything for Allah, right? There's bhakti, but it's bhakti in tamasa, in ignorance. His devotion is being manifest and is combined with madness, ignorance, hatred. That's bhakti in tamasa. Bhakti in sattva is, I'm a devotee of the Lord. And that's why I'm a devotee of the Lord, and I want to be perfectly peaceful. Right? Who cares about the people suffering out in the material world? I want to be a bhakta. I'm going to, be a perfect pujari, or not pujari being actually is very hard, but just my own puja. I'll just do my own puja, my own simple life. And who wants to take this headache and anxiety? And many people have that approach. They get frightened and they give it up. And that's better than the other two. They don't have ambition. They're not in madness, but still it's in the mode of goodness, that I don't want to take anxiety for Krishna. It's, I can take anxiety for myself, but for Krishna is too much. So people like, His Holiness Gopal Krishna Maharaj, until the last day, they were taking so much responsibility, so much anxiety for Krishna, because they were beyond the mode of goodness also. They're saying, anything for Krishna, even if I'm not peaceful, I'll do it for Krishna. Yes. So that's the different levels.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Thank you. Thank you for this nice comment question. Last one, Vijay Nishina Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, thank you for the class. I actually wanted to thank Bhadra Krishna Prabhu for asking this question. And I just wanted to make a comment. And if you can help us clarify, if that makes sense and if that's how the thinking is, that in relation to that question, we have all the three modes, goodness, passion, and ignorance. And we say some people are in the mode of goodness, some are in the mode of passion, and some are in the mode of ignorance. But in reality, it's not one pure mode that one person is in. And each person has some levels of all three modes. So at some times we have the mode of goodness that overtakes everything. And at other times our mode of passion kicks in and we are doing something in relation to that mode. And maybe that can explain why some people, even though they're in bhakti, at sometimes they're striving for other things because they still have, a combination of the three modes. And that's why that sometimes even when we have a pure devotee, he can still also get angry because he still has that mode of passion or, mode of ignorance. So does that explain why, even though we're at a certain level or we see some people at a certain level, they can still do things that are at a different mode?
Yes. Yes, you put it in good focus, this issue. Like a nice example of this is Bharat Maharaj, right? Bharat Maharaj was so spiritually advanced, is described that he was the world's greatest emperor, therefore India is known as Bharat. He had, though, been most successful at his age of 50, he had voluntarily renounced his beautiful kingdom, his empire, his beautiful family, wife, kids, and gone to the forest and become a perfect saint, like sage, and not just become a perfect sage. He was experiencing such wonderful spiritual pleasure that his kingdom did not attract him. However, when this deer came, this little deer, the fawn, and and it lost its mother, the mother, and this fawn was left unprotected. Bharat Maharaj gave his whole heart and soul to this little fawn and became very, very attached to it. So attached to that fawn that he forgot his spiritual duties. And that was because he had been a king throughout his life. He was a protector, a king. And so he had this guna, this mode of being a protector, that I am the protector. If someone's in need, I have to protect them, which is such a good thing, right? But that also remained with him as a material consciousness, that I am the protector. He forgot that the ultimate protector is Krishna. So when he's then a sage in the forest, when he sees a little deer, he says, oh, I am the protector. This little deer will subsist only if I protect the deer. And rather than just doing his duty, he got into this mood of the saving mode and forgot Krishna. He just started protecting and then he was an old man by that time, and then he died thinking of the deer. Similarly, even very advanced souls in our movement, they sometimes exhibit the quality of anger, like you were saying. They're doing such nice service, everything, but they cannot control their anger. Because it's described that Bharat Maharaj had come to the platform of bhava, but he hadn't gone all the way to the platform of prema bhakti, which is fully purified devotion. On the level of prema, one cannot fall. That's the level people like Srila Prabhupada are at. But on the level of bhava, still there's some contamination of the gunas, right? Mode of passion. I am the protector. He was a kshatriya. And that mode of passion was still there, not in a great degree, but just slivers of it. And it took a lifetime for him to purify it. So sometimes these attachments, these gunas that we still have, are so subtle that they can sometimes take a lifetime to purify. He had to come as a deer, realize his mistake, in the next life he then gets liberation. We know, of course, by Lord Chaitanya's mercy, if we surrender, we will still have so many attachments by the time we die, but by their mercy we can get liberation. That's why we choose more to go on the path of grace. Prapatti, surrender, just surrender and beg the Vaishnava to take us back home, back to Godhead. And but Bharat Maharaj was more on the process of mystic yoga, and so that's why he had to purify every single desire before he made it back there. But yes, but that's the point. Ourselves also, we have to strive to increase our bhakti, to purify it more, to bring it on the transcendental level. Otherwise, Prabhupada says that if we have even one desire left in this material world, even one small desire, I want to come back and see Norway, and if that desire is not fulfilled, we will have to take another birth. So Krishna consciousness has to be so strong, not that we go and try fulfilling all these desires, but our spiritual experience has to be so strong that all of our other material desires vanish. When we realize the beauty of Krishna, then our other material desires will vanish. And that's not easy. Even though these desires are so small, we hold on to them due to the gunas, the modes of nature. Does that answer your question, or you have a slightly different point to this?
No, Prabhu, it does this. I just wanted to get clarification if that thought process was correct.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. I think my mother has a comment. Would you like to make a comment?
Well, I was thinking about the point about pure devotees getting angry. Well, in some cases, like in the case of the 4 sages, who cursed Jai Vijay, you could say there was some, low, mode overcoming them by which they got angry. It was too much of a punishment for what they had done. But in the case of pure devotees, when they get angry, it's not always necessarily that they have other modes have taken over.
That's a good point.
It can be very, very transcendental. And in the case of Prabhupada, because it's not directed towards in a selfish way for their own self, to show themselves as being very important or superior. It's more directed towards, for the good of the disciple. And we see that not only in Srila Prabhupada, but we see that sometimes, in our own spiritual master, and situations like that. So it's not, it can just, of course, Krishna, just like Krishna, when he gets angry, his anger is very different from our anger, right?
Yes.
From same way, the pure devotee's anger is very different. I just wanted to share. You can correct me, I don't know, but this is what I was thinking. Yeah.
Yes, no, such a nice point. And the classic example that Prabhupada gives is Hanuman, and that his anger towards Ravan was completely spiritual. It was in service to the Lord. So some anger, material anger is due to material modes. And in a devotee who's not fully purified or advanced, it may be a combination for the service, but also maybe some gunas are still there. But in the pure devotee, we can accept their anger very easily because we know it's coming from the completely spiritual platform, from the right place. Like Srila Prabhupada, when he got angry for some situation, there's no one in any biography, in any memory of Prabhupada where he says, I was really hurt by Prabhupada, and and then Prabhupada said sorry, and then then we made up. There's nothing like that. I mean, you would think that at least someone would complain. Obviously, his followers, his devotees will not. But even the non-devotees, even the karmis, anyone who wrote about him, any news reporter who made a reporting about him, they could only admire him because they just felt that this person is fully purified. Even if Prabhupada chastised them, which he often did. He chastised the reporters also. But they could criticize the philosophy, they could criticize the move, but they could never criticize Prabhupada because Prabhupada was so pure. So, yeah, wonderful example that anger can also be transcendental. Shailja.
I just wanted, because the discussion was happening, I just had a
Yes.
question/comment. I wanted to get your thoughts. The more I'm learning this, the more we're learning about the Bhagavad Gita and also this discussion, it makes me often wonder that can we really attain the pure state of bhakti, living in Prasthashram and, being dependent and being engaged constantly in material world? I know the idea is to be constantly engaged and then grow the bhakti. And maybe there are examples which I'm not aware of, but is this a hypothesis I'm trying to validate? That the more we engaged in Grasashram is certainly one of the toughest. But I wanted to get your thoughts and comments on it.
Absolutely. We all are in the same boat. We feel the same way. We can by the path of grace. You see, that's why we need the mercy. We also have this process that there's no path that's only grace, because grace involves works, right? We get the mercy of the Lord by making an effort, by asking for it, by following the process. But then we know that we can do our 50%, but especially in the Grihastha ashram, the remaining 50% we cannot do. And that the hope is, the prayer is that Krishna will fulfill that 50%. So there was one time Prabhupada and the devotees were there, and Prabhupada gave the class, and at the end he said, so even if you become 80% Krishna conscious, you can go back to Godhead. And the devotees, they were looking at each other, 80%, who can do 80%? Like, this is too much. So rather than feeling happy, Prabhupada thought, I'll say 80%, they'll be so happy. They're feeling dejected. So Prabhupada says, only 70%, just do 70%, and I'll take you back to Godhead. And then finally he says, even 60% you do. And so the point is that this is the process of bhakti, therefore, that this is why we accept a spiritual master. We follow the instructions of the spiritual master, because then the hope is that Krishna and Guru, the combination of the two, will carry what we lack and preserve what we have. And Krishna, in fact, promises in the Gita, to those who come to me by devotion, why this process is better than the others. I carry what they lack and I preserve what they have. He tells us, I will carry what you lack, right? And that's his process. His process is that you surrender to me, you do your part, and I will carry what you lack. But then doing our part also is not easy. Even our part will not get us to perfection. Krishna has to help us. But the problem is that most of us are not even doing our part. What is our part? Well, our part is doing the process that Krishna and the Guru tell us to do. So Prabhupada said, if you chant 16 rounds a day and you follow 4 regulated principles, I will take you back home, back to Godhead. He said, follow the 4 regulated principles, 16 rounds, I will take you back home, back to Godhead. So what does that mean? It means your part is this. If you do this, I will do my part. But the trick is, the problem is that even that is a struggle for us. And in order to do that, we have association. We need to do service. We need to read. We need to come for classes, because in these classes, then we hear this, we have to become convinced. Because when we say, well, that's so simple, that's all Prabhupada asked, so why do I have to attend Bhagavad Gita class, or read the books, or associate with devotees? Because all that is helping us just do that nicely. Just do this, the chanting and the following of the principles nicely.
Yeah, and I imagine that Krishna will see, are you maximizing on what you have, the time you have? Are you maximizing for me, right?
Yeah.
And maybe thinking on more absolute terms, we got to do this ABCD, and we may not have the, the time to do it. But I guess Krishna is probably seeing, what is your effort? Despite being in ashram, what is your effort? That makes me feel better.
The Prabhupada said it very nicely in one place. He said, Krishna doesn't see what you're giving. Krishna sees what you're keeping. Right? So if let's say we have 10 hours a day and we're giving 1 hour to Krishna, this is 9 hours you're keeping to yourself. Someone else is a mother with 3 children, and in their movement sometimes, there's people who come after going through so much in their life. Maybe they're single, or they're went through a disease, a difficult thing. And if they are giving 1 hour of their time when they don't even have half an hour, they're just struggling, and Krishna appreciates it so much. So Krishna sees the intention and the effort, and accordingly he reciprocates, and accordingly then he gives us intelligence on how we can advance further, and he gives that through the spiritual master. That's why the living guru is important, because we can cheat ourselves, right? We can convince ourselves, oh, I'm giving my 100%, but our guide, our spiritual teacher, will tell us, no, you can do more, or this is the bare minimum, this is what we need to do. And that was Prabhupada, right? He, as a general Shiksha Guru for all of us, he said, no, everyone can do this much. At least try to do this much. But even that much, Prabhupada sometimes was lenient. Okay, at least, Krishna will understand, do less. But we need a guide for that. And that's the place of the spiritual master.
Thank you very much. This helps my doubt. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very nice discussion, everyone. We went a little over time today. And next time we'll start from the next section, which I believe was like text 9. So please, please fill out that form that was on the Bhakti Shastri group, which will be added soon with homeworks as well. And keep up with the homework, please. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Just a quick point. The homework tabs have been added.
Oh, they've been added. Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone. Rashmi Mataji is helping us in this. So big applause to her for this wonderful seva. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Dandavat pranam.
Thank you.
Thank you, Prabhu.